Number 11. India's Hanging Pillar. Lipakshi Temple in Andhra Pradesh, India is considered a marvel of ancient Indian architecture. The 16th century structure is filled with statues of gods, goddesses, musicians, and dancers. Hundreds of paintings depicting scenes from Hindu epics cover the walls, columns, and ceiling. There are around 70 stone pillars supporting the roof of the temple's dance hall. Legend has it that they were designed to withstand earthquakes. One of the pillars doesn't even touch the ground, but instead hangs from the ceiling. There is a wafer-thin gap between its base and the floor, where a sheet of paper or cloth can easily pass through, creating an incredible illusion that the pillar is floating. Nobody knows how or why the pillar is situated like this, although many have tried to figure it out. According to one story, a British engineer supposedly moved the pillar in an attempt to understand what supports it. In doing so, he dislodged the pillar, leaving it in its current position. Another legend claims that members of the British government tried to move the pillar to do some repairs, but realized it wasn't possible. Consequently, it was left the way it remains today. There's no telling which, if either story is true, and the hanging pillar continues to fascinate visitors at the Lipakshi Temple, which is famous for its ornate architecture and beautiful artwork. Number 10. Viking Twilight Compass. As the Vikings sailed through the North Atlantic along the 1600-mile journey from Norway to Greenland, they navigated using an ancient compass called the Unartak disc. Measuring just 2.76 inches in diameter, the small wooden partial disc was discovered in an 11th century convent in Greenland in 1948. It was originally thought to be a decoration or a sundial, but in 2014, researchers performed tests that revealed that it could have been used as a nighttime compass called a twilight board. By using the Unartak disc in combination with other instruments, the Vikings would have been able to navigate for nearly an hour after sunset around the time of the spring equinox. They would have needed a pair of stones called sunstones, which determined the sun's position, and something called a shadow stick, which identified their cardinal direction. Neither of these items were discovered along with the Unartak disc, but medieval records indicate that sunstones and shadow sticks were available to the Vikings, making this nighttime navigation theory entirely plausible. Number 9. Hypocaust. The earliest known form of central heating was developed over 2,000 years ago in ancient Rome. Known as the hypocaust, the system was powered by furnaces that burned constantly. Homes that were equipped with a hypocaust were built 2 feet off the ground. The furnaces were installed beneath, and hot air circulated through the space beneath the house. As the hot air cooled, it escaped the building through flues in the walls and roof vents. In addition to providing warmth, hypocaust systems were also used for creating saunas by putting a pool into the room. The furnace heated the water, causing steam to rise up into the air. The room's temperature easily reached 100 degrees Fahrenheit or higher, with the humidity peaking at 100%. Allowing smoke from a hypocaust to leak into a house would have put a home's occupants at risk of carbon monoxide poisoning. The Romans were careful to ensure that this didn't happen. Hypocaust systems were built by skilled engineers who knew what they were doing, but making sure they were safe also meant they were expensive, and only the wealthy could usually afford one for their home. They were more commonly used in bathhouses, which functioned as major social centers in ancient Rome. Number 8. The first robot. Most people only think of robots in a modern sense, but their history dates back to over 2,000 years to the flying pigeon, a self-propelled steam-powered device that was created between 400 and 350 BC. It was the invention of an ancient Greek scientist and philosopher named Archytas, who was a good friend of Plato. Archytas is credited with being the founder of mathematical mechanics, or what we now call mechanical engineering, and he designed the flying pigeon as part of a study on how birds fly. The steam-powered robo-bird was made from wood and suspended from a pivot bar. It had a hollow and cylindrical lightweight body with 2 sets of wings, along with an airtight heated boiler in its rear. The boiler generated steam and pressure, which eventually defeated the machine's mechanical resistance and caused it to take flight. The flying pigeon traveled for nearly 660 feet before running out of steam, making it the first ever self-propelled flying device, and in some sense, the world's earliest robot. The experiment also marked one of the first known recorded instances of a scientist studying bird flight. And while the mechanics behind it are rather simple, the flying pigeon was considered highly advanced at the time of its creation. Hey, real quick, if you're new to the channel, welcome! Give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more cool videos like this. Number 7. Ulfbert's Sword. Between 800 and 1000 AD, the Vikings manufactured a lightweight, razor-sharp, and flexible sword that appears to have been made with technology that wasn't readily available until some 800 years later. Around 170 of the swords, all of them engraved with the word Ulfbert, have been found. They were made from iron ore that had to be heated to 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit to remove impurities. To strengthen the metal, it was mixed with carbon, effectively turning it into steel. At the time, people had no way of heating something to such a high temperature. The technology to do this wasn't available on a large scale until the 19th and 20th centuries, during the Industrial Revolution. Instead, people usually hammered the impurities out of their swords. But the Vikings somehow found a way to create swords that had no impurities and contained 3 times more carbon than any other metals at the time. Known as crucible steel, the mixture was likely made in the Kingdom of Francia, near modern-day France and Germany. But the identity of the sword maker is a mystery, and the exact process they use for making crucible steel is unknown. Researchers believe they may have borrowed techniques from Arab blacksmiths who made similar high-quality material called Damascus steel. The swords may have also been made using steel imported from India or the Arab empires. Number 6. Roman concrete. Modern concrete is the world's most widely used building material. It's been around since the 18th century and is a relatively simple mixture containing cement, water, sand, and rocks. Ancient Persians, Egyptians, Assyrians, and Romans all favored their own versions of concrete. It was especially popular in the Roman Empire, which is credited with perfecting the material. Roman concrete is extremely resilient. Some of the structures they built with it are still standing today, over 1,000 years after the empire fell. This is pretty impressive, especially considering how modern concrete can break down in as little as 50 years. Scientists found that philipsite and another incredibly rare mineral called aluminum tobermarite had formed in the concrete where volcanic ash had dissolved, causing the material to strengthen over time. The Romans may have poured salt water into the mixture, causing it to react with volcanic ash and produce the strengthening minerals. But this process takes centuries, and scientists have yet to develop a similar but quicker forming solution. Number 5. Lycurgus Cup. The Lycurgus Cup is a 4th century Roman chalice that appears jade green when light passes through it from the front, and blood red when illuminated from behind. It's made of dichroic glass, which changes color depending on the way the light strikes it. The 1600-year-old cup is the only complete Roman artifact made from the material, and it displays the most impressive color-changing qualities out of any known artifacts. For decades after the British Museum acquired the cup in the 1950s, scientists struggled to understand the dynamics behind its chameleon effect. They came one step closer to solving the puzzle in 1990, when they examined the glass under a microscope and discovered that it was infused with silver and gold particles that were ground down to less than 1,000th the size of a grain of table salt. The mixture was precise, indicating that the Romans created the chalice's color-changing characteristics on purpose. In this sense, they were early pioneers of nanotechnology. Light causes the electrons in the metal flecks to vibrate, transforming the cup's color depending on the viewer's angle. Acting on the suspicion that different liquids would also affect the artifact's color, researchers mimicked the technology on a small plastic plate and exposed it to water, oil, sugar, and salt solutions. The plate displayed an array of distinctive shades, meaning that the cup would react similarly if it were put to the same test. Number 4. Automata. The mathematician and engineer Heron of Alexandria lived and worked sometime between the 1st and 3rd centuries. He invented numerous impressive machines, including the world's first automated vending machine, a coin-operated holy water dispenser, and an organ that was powered by a wind wheel, which was the earliest known wind-powered machine. Heron also developed one of the first robots, known as an automaton. One of his first automata was a mobile shrine dedicated to the god Dionysus, featuring figurines of the god and his worshippers. It was situated on a wheeled base which rolled to a specific point and displayed a religious scene using the figurines. Another one of Heron's robots was a miniature theater which featured a tragedy from beginning to end. These machines essentially operated on clockwork by using a descending counterweight in various chords and axles to make the scene unfold. Heron is considered one of the most influential early pioneers of engineering, math, geometry, and physics. His other inventions include an automatic temple door opener, which worked using heat and pneumatics, and a steam engine called the Yalopile, which is perhaps his most famous creation. Number 3. Yakchal. Modern refrigeration technology is relatively new. Its very beginnings date back to 1834, and the first refrigerators for home use were made in 1913. It wasn't until the 1930s that they became a common household appliance. But ancient people developed their own ingenious ways of keeping perishables cold as early as 1000 BC. Starting around 400 BC, various civilizations who lived in hotter climates began using what is known as a yakchal. These large dome-shaped devices were made of a special insulating mortar called saruj, which contained sand, clay, egg whites, goat hair, lime, and ash. They cooled the air through evaporation. Yakchals were insulated by walls measuring up to 6.5 feet tall, along with cool water that was channeled into the structure. These sophisticated devices kept ice cold year-round, even in scorching hot desert climates. They were equipped with trenches where melted ice water collected and refroze overnight. The ice was used for cooling certain foods on hot days, such as desserts that were traditionally served frozen. These delicacies were not just reserved for royalty, they were available to commoners, thanks to the yakchal being a common household item at the time. Number 2. Hypogeum of Halsaflieni. The Hypogeum of Halsaflieni is an ancient complex of underground chambers in Malta. Dating back between 4000 and 2500 BC, it was likely used as a sanctuary and a burial site. It's one of Europe's only known Neolithic necropolises, and some experts believe that it's the world's oldest prehistoric underground temple. The 3-level, ornately decorated structure was carved directly into the surrounding limestone. Each chamber was used for a different purpose. There was a temple, a cemetery, and a funeral hall. The oracle chamber is perhaps the most fascinating part of the Hypogeum. In this room, words spoken at a normal volume are amplified and can be heard throughout the entire building. The acoustics can be scientifically explained, but researchers struggle to understand why the chamber was built and if the amplifying effect was intentional. Some people believe the chamber may have been used by a prophetic priest called an oracle, possibly to affect people's psyches or to enhance mystical experiences during rituals. Number 1. Flexible glass. The Phoenicians made the first man-made glass, but historians credit the Romans with perfecting the art of glassmaking. Various Roman texts describe the creation of something called vitrum flexile, or flexible glass, during the reign of Tiberius Caesar. It is mentioned in Pliny the Elder's Natural History, as well as the Satyricon. Pliny the Elder's encyclopedic description of flexible glass discusses how Tiberius Caesar banned the material to keep the value of precious metals like gold, silver, and copper from plummeting. The author admitted that the story's truthfulness is questionable, but the tale nevertheless spread widely and persisted for a long time. Authored by a man named Petronius, Satiricon's account of flexible glass describes how its inventor demonstrated the technology to Tiberius by throwing a cup on the ground. To the emperor's surprise, it didn't break. It was dented from the impact of hitting the floor, so the glassmaker used a small hammer to reshape it. After learning that the inventor was the only person who knew how to make flexible glass, Tiberius reportedly executed him to ensure that he took the recipe for it to the grave. Modern researchers don't think that flexible glass ever really existed, but they tried to figure out what it would have been made of if it did. For example, if the glassmaker had gotten his hands on some boric oxide, it would have greatly strengthened the material, but this fails to explain the flexibility of the glass. Even if flexible glass was real, there is a very real chance that we'll never know what it was made from, since it's so scarcely mentioned in historical records. Number 10. The Relics of Saint Macrina the Younger. Macrina the Younger was a nun who lived in Turkey during the 4th century. She chose her career path after her fiancé died, and the thought of marrying someone else just didn't feel right. For the rest of her life, she dedicated herself entirely to religion. Macrina's devotion had a major influence on her family. She played a big role in the spiritual education of her brother, who went on to become Saint Gregory of Nyssa. Macrina's family established a monastic community of virgins from various social ranks, including both aristocrats and non-aristocrats. All members, including those who were slaves in their previous lives, had the same rights and freedoms there. Throughout her life, Macrina became known as the standard for what it meant to be an early Christian woman, and her legacy remains very much alive to this day. There's a festival dedicated to her that takes place every year on July 19. Her sarcophagus is housed in a chapel at the Church of St. Macrina in Cappadocia, but there are relics of the pioneering nun elsewhere too. Macrina's foot is at the Athonite monastery of Iveron in northern Greece, along with the head of her brother, Saint Gregory, and the hand of a Byzantine bishop known as Basil the Great. There's very little information available online about these relics. Like many other religious treasures, they're certainly not the most pleasant-looking items. And to many, if not most people, the idea of cutting off a dead person's body part and worshipping it is more than a little strange. The Christian tradition of venerating body parts is especially popular in Catholicism. A study from 2006 suggests that there are a few possible reasons for it. The first would be the importance of physical contact in biblical examples of healing. It could have also originated among Egyptian Christians who adhered to the pagan custom of embalming and displaying the bodies of martyrs in their homes. This may have given rise to the tendency for thieves to hack off and steal body parts in order to sell them for a hefty price on the black market. Number 9. Mutilated vampires. While working at a cemetery near the German border in western Poland last year, archaeologists discovered 3 disturbingly mutilated bodies. Dating back to the 13th and 14th centuries, the remains bore signs of decapitation, deep spine punctures, and other abuse, indicating that people thought they were vampires. One person's head had been wedged between 2 stones to weigh it down and prevent them from rising from the dead. The victims who endured these horrific injuries were not vampires. They suffered from health problems that probably had a stigma attached to them. One woman appears to have a bone condition called kyphosis, which causes a person's back to hunch. She was buried face down with her knees broken. A man found at the site may have also suffered from kyphosis. The haphazard burials are much different from the rest of the cemetery's orderly and organized graves. Most people were buried with their hands laid neatly across their chest or by their sides. It was common at various points in history throughout Europe for people to engage in gory rituals to stop so-called vampires from coming back to life. In addition to wedging a person's head between stones, it was customary to remove a body's legs or pin their neck down with a sickle. People with disabilities and those suffering from cholera and other infectious diseases were prime targets for this gruesome treatment. As archaeologist Leslie Gregorica pointed out in her research, the first person who died during a disease outbreak was usually seen as the one who was most likely to return in vampire form. Number 8. Murder Island Bodies. In 1629, a Dutch vessel called the Batavia wrecked 37 miles off of Australia's west coast while en route to Indonesia. Around 60 people died and nearly 300 were left stranded on Beacon Island. When water became scarce, 40 of the survivors staged a brutal months-long mutiny. They were led by the ship's third-in-command and merchant, Hieronymus Cornelis. He dispatched different groups to nearby islands in search of resources while murdering anyone he thought might get in his way, including women and children. 7 women's lives were spared, only for them to be forced into sex slavery. When all was said and done, the mutiny-related death toll was estimated at around 115, earning Beacon Island the nickname of Murder Island. In 2017, nearly 400 years after the chaos went down, archaeologists discovered a communal grave with the remains of 5 people in it. But these individuals were laid to rest respectfully, unlike other bodies that have been found, which were clearly buried in a hurry. This indicates that the people in the grave were not killed in the mutiny, but that they perhaps died shortly after the disaster and before the violence began. They might have been lucky for this because at least they avoided being mercilessly slaughtered by Cornelis. The mutineers were eventually captured, and at first, Cornelis argued that he was just trying to survive, but authorities weren't having it. They tortured him into confessing, and he was hanged alongside 6 of his men. Researchers are still piecing together what can easily be described as one of Australia's bloodiest mutinies of all time. They plan to perform further testing to see what they can learn about the unfortunate souls who perished at Murder Island. Number 7. Isleworth Mona Lisa. You're probably familiar with Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa. As one of the most famous paintings of all time, it's instantly recognizable to most people. So can you imagine how strange it would be to see that same exact woman in a different painting? Well, that actually exists. Known as the Isleworth Mona Lisa, there is another painting featuring the same woman with the same enigmatic half-smile we've come to know and love her for. Throughout his career, Da Vinci only painted around 20 works completely on his own, with scholars believing that only 15 of them survive today. The Isleworth Mona Lisa is not considered to be one of them. Experts and art enthusiasts disagree vehemently about whether it's an authentic Da Vinci piece. Many people believe that Da Vinci painted the portrait, including its current owners, who think it was made about 10 years before the Mona Lisa itself. It may have come from one of Da Vinci's workshops, where other painters often worked on or finished his pieces. The Swiss nonprofit group the Mona Lisa Organization believes that the painting is 100% authentic, but there are equally credible experts who are convinced it's a fake, including Martin Kemp, a University of Oxford art history professor who specializes in Da Vinci's work. Nobody truly knows who created the Isleworth Mona Lisa, and we may never find out. Do you think there are more Da Vinci works of art hidden somewhere? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 6. St. Oliver Plunkett's Head. Oliver Plunket was a 17th century martyr who became Ireland's first new saint in nearly 700 years, when he was canonized in 1975. In 1997, Plunket became the country's patron saint for peace and reconciliation. He became a priest in the messy aftermath of the Cromwellian conquest, which saw the persecution and execution of the Catholic clergy. Plunket was no exception to this bitter treatment and was targeted in a conspiracy to advance hatred against Catholics known as the Popish Plot. He was found guilty of promoting the Roman faith and was sentenced to death. In 1861, 55-year-old Plunket was hanged and quartered. His body parts were buried in a pair of tin boxes. They were exhumed a few years later and taken to a Benedictine monastery in Germany. From there, Plunkett's head was transported to Rome, then to Northern Ireland. It's been on display in a golden shrine at St. Peter's Church in Drogheda since 1921. Most of the priest's body are in Downside Abbey, England, while the rest are in Germany. Number 5. Tens of thousands of bodies. In 2018, archaeologists were tasked with exhuming and relocating some 40,000 skeletons to make room for a new, high-speed rail line next to Euston Terminal, one of London's busiest train stations. In what was likely the largest excavation of bodies ever undertaken in Britain, the team unearthed the bodies from below St. James Gardens, a sprawling property that functioned as a cemetery from 1788 to 1853. Thanks to the high amount of clay in the ground preventing water damage, many of the coffins and remains were remarkably well preserved. The bodies showed signs of tuberculosis, broken bones, and other traumatic injuries. There was also evidence of dental procedures, including dentures, as well as surgeries, including skulls with saw marks. The discoveries are helping experts learn more about daily life in Britain during one of its most significant historical periods, according to bone expert Mike Henderson. He explained that having such a large data set to study could lead to a better understanding of things like mortality rates and diseases during the time period. Number 4. Death Labyrinth. Located 10,200 feet above sea level in a remote valley of the Peruvian Andes, the 3,000-year-old Chavin de Huantar temple served as a place of worship for the pre-Columbian Chavin culture. While excavating there in 2018, archaeologists uncovered a network of 35 interlocking tunnels dating back to 1200 and 200 BC. They went inside using a tiny remote-controlled robot and discovered the skeletons of 3 people who appeared to have been sacrificed. The trio consisted of a little boy, a teenager, and a man who was between 20 and 30 years old when he died. At least one of them was buried face down beneath piles of rocks, which project leader John Rick described as not very honorable treatment. He further explained that the individuals were probably low-ranking members of society. The tunnels are still being located and explored, so there may be more discoveries waiting to be made. Experts plan to continue studying the site in hopes of determining whether the 3 people they found were sacrificed or what led to their deaths. Number 3. Kabayan Mummy Caves. During the 20th century, loggers discovered hundreds of coffins and human remains inside a series of ancient burial caves outside of the Philippine capital of Manila. The graves belong to the Ibaloy tribe and date back to between 1200 and 1500 AD. Shortly before a tribe member passed away, they drank a salty beverage to kickstart the mummification process. After they died, their body was cleansed, prepared with herbs, and heated over a several-week period. This involved placing the deceased person over a fire in a seated position while blowing tobacco smoke into their mouth to dry out their organs. Then the corpse was placed in a fetal position inside a decorative oval-shaped wooden coffin. This practice ended after the Spanish arrived in the Philippines, and the burials were left undisturbed until they were rediscovered in the early 1900s. They were designated a national cultural treasure, but not a lot was done to protect the graves. Over time, the burials were looted, vandalized, infested with insects, and riddled with fungal growth. In an effort to prevent more damage, the government has avoided disclosing the location of the tombs, but people still manage to find them. Getting there requires a 5-hour drive into the mountains, followed by an arduous 5-hour hike up a series of stone steps. Not everyone who visits the mummies has bad intentions. Locals continue to pay their respects by bringing prepared meals, which help ensure that the deceased are well fed in the afterlife. Number 2. A pit of amputated arms. In 2012, archaeologists working near the German border in France unexpectedly discovered a 6,000-year-old pit filled with amputated human arms, fingers, and hands. They were performing routine work ahead of a construction project in the village of Bergheim when they made the grisly find. 14 of the property's ancient pits or silos contained human bones, but one hole stood out from the rest. In it were at least 7 severed arms bearing amputation marks from a knife or an axe. One of the limbs belonged to a child between the ages of 12 and 16 years old. After tossing the arms into the pit, someone dumped at least 2 adults and 4 children in there, including a baby less than a year old. The remains of a middle-aged man who'd had his arm cut off showed telltale signs of repeated blows to the head, which proved fatal. Archaeologist Fanny Chanel, who co-authored a study of the gruesome site, wrote that the discovery did not help experts better understand the ancient people's everyday lives. Instead, it forced them to focus on a single event. The team failed to determine what caused the violence. They believe it may have resulted from warfare or a judicial sentencing. The unfortunate people found in the pit were most likely farmers and animal herders who lived in villages, and their brutal deaths indicate that there was a dark side to social hierarchies found in some Neolithic societies. Number 1. Mummified lung. The Basilica of Saint-Denis in Paris is the burial site of many French kings. In 1959, archaeologist Michael Fleury discovered a mummified lung inside of a stone sarcophagus at the site. Along with it were a skeleton, jewelry, cloth, and leather fragments, and a strand of hair. The remains belong to the Merovingian Queen Arnegund, who lived from 515 to 580 AD. She was one of King Clotair's 6 wives and the mother of King Chilperic. Experts identified her based on a gold ring they found, bearing the inscription Arnegundis. For decades, experts wondered if Queen Arnegundis' lung mummified naturally or if someone deliberately embalmed it. They were confused because it was the only part of her body that was preserved. A team of researchers solved the mystery in 2016 when they identified a copper belt on Arnegund's corpse as the preserving agent. As it decayed, the belt deposited large amounts of copper oxide throughout the lung, which scientists detected during a biopsy. This had an embalming effect on the organ. They also found that Queen Arnegund's body was injected with a fluid made from a combination of spices and aromatic plants, which may have also helped preserve her lung.
Number 11. The Dark Sarcophagus. In 2018, archaeologists unearthed the largest sarcophagus ever found within the ancient city of Alexandria. People immediately began speculating about what was inside the huge granite coffin. Some believed that it contained the long-lost remains of Alexander the Great. Others thought that there was a curse inside, and that opening the sarcophagus would unleash it. But of course, scientists went ahead and opened it anyway. The box was 8.5 foot by 5 foot. In it, they found the skeletons of 2 men and 1 woman, immersed in putrid red sewage that had seeped into the coffin from a nearby apartment building. The bones were placed into the sarcophagus at different times. There was a hole in one of the men's skulls, indicating that he had survived ancient brain surgery or had been shot in the head with an arrow. The remains date back to either sometime between 332 BC and 30 BC, during the Greek-ruled Ptolemaic dynasty, or from 30 BC to 642 AD, when Rome ruled Egypt. Researchers don't know who the individuals were or why they were buried in such a large coffin, and hope to learn more about the mysterious trio through DNA testing and CT scans. Number 10. Magnificent Burial. Less than 2,000 years ago, when Rome ruled Egypt, a woman named Demetria was laid to rest in an ornately decorated tomb at Saqqara. Archaeologists discovered her burial in 2019 and were fascinated by what they saw. Demetria's grave contains a carving of her wearing a white dress and carrying grapes, while a pet of an unknown species looks up at her. A Greek inscription on the image translates to, Demetria, daughter of Menelaus, granddaughter of Ammonia, worthy, farewell. Ammonia was most likely Demetria's paternal grandmother, according to Roman Egypt expert Roger Bagnall, who deciphered the inscriptions for Life Science. He further explained that the girl's paternal grandfather may have been considered illegitimate, since his name is absent from the carving. Another etching inside Demetria's burial shows the deities Thoth, Seth, and Anubis. It's accompanied by an inscription about her father, Menelaus. The carving contains the rarely used words therapeutes, indicating that Menelaus was a servant of the gods rather than mortals. Number 9. What ancient Egyptians looked like. Scientists successfully reconstructed a mummy's genome for the first time in 2017 when they extracted DNA from 3 men who were buried in the ancient city of Absur el-Melek, sometime between 1380 BC and 425 AD. The information helped researchers to reconstruct the trio's faces, offering the first ever glimpse at what someone living in ancient Egypt over 2,000 years ago may have looked like. Using a method of genetic analysis called forensic DNA phenotyping, the team created 3D models of the mummies' faces. The process works by predicting certain aspects of a person's appearance, like the shape of the face, based on their DNA. Scientists determined that the man had light brown skin with dark brown hair and eyes. They are more genetically similar to people in the Mediterranean or Middle East than people living in modern Egypt, according to a statement from Parabon Nanolabs, the company that performed the analysis. Ellen Greytak, the director of bioinformatics, told Life Science that working with ancient DNA is complicated because it's often degraded or mixed with bacterial DNA. In cases where there are important pieces missing from a DNA sample, scientists rely on nearby information to predict what the missing pieces contained. The technology isn't foolproof, but it's also a lot more than just a guessing game. It's a useful tool for bringing us closer to our past. Whose DNA do you think scientists are most interested in studying, and why? Let us know in the comments below. And if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 8. Pink Pharaoh Statue. In late 2019, archaeologists discovered a rare pink granite statue of the pharaoh Ramesses II near the Giza pyramids west of Cairo. They also found a miniature limestone sphinx while excavating the property of a man who was caught illegally hunting for treasure. The 3.5-foot tall, 1.8-foot wide statue is one of the rarest ancient Egyptian discoveries ever made. It's the first known sculpture of its kind made from granite. A hieroglyphic on the back of the artifact translates to strong bull. This is a testament to the ruler's strength and vitality, according to Mustafa Waziri, Secretary General of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities. He further explained that the statue was meant to serve as a resting place for the Ka, or life force, after death. Also known as Ramesses the Great, Ramesses II ruled Egypt from 1279 BC to 1213 BC during the 19th dynasty. He's thought to be the pharaoh in the biblical Exodus story. During his 60-year reign, he vastly expanded the empire. Ramesses II lived to around 90 years old, vastly outliving the average ancient Egyptian's life expectancy of no more than 40 years. He built more monuments and had more children than any other pharaoh. Number 7. Hyksos origins. A mysterious dynasty called the Hyksos ruled Egypt from 1638 BC to 1530 BC. For a long time, experts believed that they were foreigners who invaded the region and took over. But new evidence recently revealed that the Hyksos may have come from within Egypt all along. Researchers performed a chemical analysis on some teeth from Hyksos graves and found that the alleged first foreigners to rule Egypt had already been there for several generations before coming to power. Written records of the Hyksos are incredibly scarce. During the 3rd century BC, long after they fell out of power, a Ptolemaic priest named Manetho wrote that Hyksos invaded Egypt from the northeast after the Middle Kingdom fell around 1650 BC. Ancient hieroglyphs describe it as a tumultuous and unstable period, but it's hard to know what to believe. Dynasties that ruled after the Hyksos destroyed records and spread propaganda about previous rulers, earning the Hyksos a disorderly and chaotic reputation. Excavations at their capital city Avaris suggest that the Hyksos may have originated in the Middle East. Tombs found at the ancient site contain evidence of an interesting mixture of Egyptian and non-Egyptian burial customs. New findings show that the Hyksos were a distinct ethnic group who originated in different regions and migrated to Egypt in waves. Most of the men whose teeth were analyzed as part of the study arrived in the area before the Hyksos came to power. These discoveries challenge the long-standing belief that the Hyksos entered Egypt as a unified invading force. There were also many female remains at the site, which made scientists realize that they need to further investigate the roles women played in Hyksos society. Number 6. A new queen. Earlier this year, archaeologists discovered the 4,200-year-old tomb of a previously unknown queen at the ancient necropolis of Saqqara. The funerary temple was found near the pyramid of King Teti and contains inscriptions identifying the woman as his wife and daughter, Queen Nate. Until then, researchers believed that King Teti only had two wives, named Iput I and Kuit II. Back in 2010, the team discovered a pyramid that they only recently realized was dedicated to Queen Niet. And there are more fascinating sites and artifacts nearby, waiting to be unearthed. Archaeologist and team leader Zahi Hawass told the press that only 30% of Saqqara has been excavated, and that most of the sprawling site remains buried for now. He also said that discoveries like this are rewriting ancient Egyptian history, especially when it comes to the New Kingdom's 18th and 19th dynasties, during which time King Teti ruled. In addition to discovering Queen Nate's funerary chamber, the team found an array of New Kingdom artifacts dating back roughly 3,000 years. The collection includes figurines, pottery, dozens of mummies, and 54 colorful coffins. It marked the first time wooden coffins from the New Kingdom were found at Saqqara, according to Supreme Council of Antiquities Chief Mustafa Waziri. The sheer number of discoveries happening here and elsewhere throughout Egypt reminds us of how little we truly know about the ancient Egyptians and how much we have yet to learn. Number 5. Petite Sarcophagus. While excavating a tomb complex in Egypt's Baharia Oasis in 2010, archaeologists unearthed an unusually small sarcophagus depicting a wide-eyed woman wearing a tunic. It was the first Roman-style mummy ever found in the region, and the only mummy of its type among the site's 14 burials, which date back to around 2,000 years ago during the Greco-Roman era. Experts initially believed that the 3.2-foot-long sarcophagus belonged to a child, but its elaborate features, including eyes containing colored stones, a headscarf, bracelet, shoes, and beaded necklace, indicated that the remains belonged to a wealthy and influential adult. Speaking with National Geographic, Mohammed Afifi of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities said that he initially thought the mummy was a dwarf, but the researchers don't know for sure who she was or how old she was. Number 4. Spelling mistakes. Ancient Egyptian scribes were entrusted with highly important tasks, like record keeping and communicating. They began their training during childhood, learning under a master scribe who taught them how to write letters, wills, tax forms, and other documents. Scribes used writing boards to practice their penmanship by copying texts. Writing boards were often reused and passed through the hands of many students. A writing board dating back sometime between 1981 and 1802 BC, during the Middle Kingdom period, shows that teachers corrected their students' work much like they do now. A student named Inisu used to write a letter to his brother, Pe Nisu. The writing reflects a simplified cursive hieroglyphic style that was developed around 3000 BC to make it easier for scribes to compose lengthy administrative and religious documents. Inisu's teacher marked and corrected his mistakes with red ink, much like modern teachers do when they grade papers. Discoveries like this show that even though our lives are much different from how people lived during the ancient world, we do have a few things in common. Number 3. Fayum mummy portraits. During the late 19th century, British archaeologist W.M. Flinders Petrie discovered 150 portraits buried with mummies in a Roman-era cemetery in Egypt's Fayum Oasis region. Dating back to the 1st century BC, the paintings were made on wood panels. They display eerily lifelike qualities and reflect a confusing combination of Egyptian, Roman, and Greek customs, leaving experts puzzled. The artwork sat in storage for decades, receiving very little attention from the academic community. Portraits are rarely found in Egypt's historical record. Getty Museum conservator Marie Svoboda recognized their value when she started the Ancient Panel Paintings Examination, Analysis, and Research Project in 2013. Her goal was to compile a database of the little-studied mummy portraits that are scattered throughout the world. The project is helping researchers learn more about the artwork by looking for patterns in the materials, painting styles, and other characteristics. They have found that the portraits were created in studios, with multiple artists often working on the same piece. The paintings were made with imported materials, reflecting Egypt's vast trading connections. Portraits that can be traced to the mummy show that the individuals passed away at the age they are depicted as in the image, meaning the pictures were created around the time of death. There are many lingering, unanswered questions about the artwork. As the database continues to grow, each promising lead leaves experts with new mysteries to solve. Number 2. Mud Mummy. In 1860, someone donated a mummy to the University of Sydney in Australia. It wasn't until 1999 that experts performed a CT scan and noticed something strange inside the sarcophagus. They extracted some of the wrappings and found that they were covered in a sandy, mud-like mixture, which has never been seen in any other burial. Another team of researchers examined the mummy in 2017 and found that the person inside did not match the sarcophagus. The mummy dates back to around 1207 BC, but the coffin was created in 1000 BC, making it nearer than its occupant. Antiquities traders probably put the wrong body into the sarcophagus because they could make more money by selling a complete set, rather than selling the mummy and the coffin separately. The team believes that the woman was encased in mud as a money-saving way of preparing someone of a low social status for the afterlife. Mummification was costly and time-consuming, and it typically required imported materials. Not everyone could afford it. Although this is the only mud mummy ever found, it indicates that there were low-cost, locally sourced alternatives for people who needed an affordable burial. Number 1. Gilded Mummy. While excavating at Saqqara in 2018, archaeologists uncovered a tomb complex containing a mummification workshop, mummies, sarcophagi, and a silver face mask gilded with gold. There are several underground burial shafts, with some measuring over 100 feet deep. The silver mask dates back to sometime between 664 BC and 404 BC, and is one of several artifacts at the site that are believed to be at least 2,500 years old. Its haunting eyes are made from calcite, obsidian, and a black gemstone. Team leader Ramadan Badri Hussein described the mask as a sensation and said that very few precious metal artifacts have survived into the present due to looting. It belongs to a mummy who was found inside a badly damaged coffin, bearing an image of the goddess Mut. Based on what's left of the writing on the casket, researchers believe that the mummy was a priest who served the deity. Inside the mummification workshop, the team found bowls and measuring cups bearing the names of substances that were used in the mummifying process, as well as 2 large basins that were used for preparing mummies. Excavations are ongoing, and there could be more exciting discoveries to come. Thanks for watching. Which one of these discoveries from ancient Egypt fascinated you the most? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time. Bye!